Hey guys, it's TyrantGod. I know it's been a while since I posted a video up here on YouTube, so sorry about that. It's been changing lines of work and procrastinating and a lot of procrastinating. But with the Adeptus Mechanicus having had their new Codex being announced, coming out quote-unquote soon by Games Workshop, I'm very motivated to get my army done to kind of showcase it in some videos. Now I am new to this hobby. There's gonna be a lot of new stuff I'm trying out, and this is really just a log of what I'm doing. On top of that, I hope it kind of encourages enthusiasts to try out what they want to do, pick an army, and realize, with any kind of patience, you can paint it up to a standard that you enjoy. Now, I do have another video planned after this one, after about 2 weeks, and the reason why is I kind of accepted a challenge from one of my friends, and we'll get into that a little bit later. But for today, I'm going to be showing off my Adeptus Mechanicus Skitarii. Just a basic version, not anything fancy like the Alpha or any of the comm units or anything, or the arc weapons. So, let's go ahead and dive in on that today. So, the first thing I did when I had any of my models was to go ahead and magnetize all of them. Now, by using a hand drill, or if you have a little extra cash, you can use a rotary tool. I recommend the hand tool to start because the rotary tool drill can kind of make a lot of mistakes. I even had one of my Skitarii helmets just go flying and I never found it again. So, starting out, I definitely use a hand drill, and then when you feel confident enough, use that rotary tool. Now, I went through a lot of different designs for the paint scheme. I want to say about 12 different ones. I'm only going to show a couple here. And you might be thinking, oh, you went through 12 different designs. How could you have any models left? Well, one thing I found out that I definitely took advantage of to make all these schemes happen and erase them is to get some isopropyl alcohol, put a model or all the models I had painted into a small little bucket, and let them soak, and then brush it out with a toothbrush, and they're good as new. You do just have to be careful with some of the spiky bits, but other than that, it's a total money saver. All except one paint that I use, which is the Army Paint white spray paint rattle can. I couldn't get that off, so I just went ahead and recoated these in black with the same brand. The black does come off, but just be forewarned, if you do that, the white kind of stays. Unless I had a fluke batch or something like that, that's fine. Now, the scheme that I did settle on, its base Cloak uses Citadel Screamer Pink. Now, they don't have this available, as far as I know, as an airbrush variant, so I had to kind of guess on how much I was mixing in. I think it's like a 4 to 5 thinner ratio to the paint. So 1 drop of paint, 4 to 5 on the thinner. But it still ended up clogging on me, and I'm brand new to airbrushing too, just like everything else in this hobby, so later on, when I ended up stripping it and didn't like it, I just did it by hand. But eventually I hope that I'll be able to get good enough with this. I can just do like vehicles and large batches of armies and stuff like that. Now, I didn't do the base with the model right away. I instead put it on some glue tack. The reason why is I wanted to kind of just do the base last. I hadn't really decided on it. So there's that, and also it kind of made it a lot more workable and easier to use if I didn't mount it. So do it at your own discretion. That's pretty much all I have to say about that. Moving on, I went ahead and placed the top of the chassis on that tack. Just really made it easier. So I guess one of the small advantages of magnetizing things during the building process is that made it way easier. And that allowed me to easily place in the Citadel Ushabti bone paint, and just by putting in some thin coats here and there and really kind of stacking it up. You do have to put like 2 or 3 layers to overcome the darker paint below it, but once you do, it looks fantastic. After that, I went ahead and used Army Painter's Rough Iron paint. It's metallic, and I have to say it's probably one of my favorite paints I've seen. Reason being is it's got so many pigments inside of it. I mean, it's like black and silver and reddish and purplish and brown, and it just looks fantastic. It's kind of like an older world futuristic metal. I don't really know how to describe it, but it's definitely become probably one of my favorites. On that note, I would definitely say that when I did this, I had to spend a lot of time being nice and clean about it. And I mostly just used one brush size for the entire project, so that was kind of nice. Now for the wires and hoses and stuff, I went ahead and used Army Painter's, matte black color. But in reality, you can use probably any black, like from Citadel or Viejo or Vallejo or however you pronounce it. Any black should work just fine for those things. What really kind of comes into play later on is how you do the connections. Now, I do end up doing two different metallics when I do these quote-unquote connections. One is with the hoses and one is with like electrical stuff. Now those two colors in order are going to be the gunmetal gray that they have and the Army Painter weapon bronze. I basically use that not just for the connection pieces where the hose is attached, but I also used it to kind of almost dry brush it, but more really just detail the hoses to make them look like they're a bit worn. As for the Army Painter weapon bronze, I use that for the electrical connections, and it really stands out and pops. So I like it. It's a good way to differentiate it. There's a lot of different Skitarii and adds each of their own flavors. I also do that with some of the connections and stuff that aren't actually on the wires, like on the leg itself. Though I had to be really careful with it. If I ended up making a mistake, I would just essentially pollute the area with a lot of water, dry off my brush, and soak it up, and it basically erases it. So that's kind of a good tip if you are new to it like I am. If you make a big mistake, you can easily clean it up, no problem. Now, while this kind of goes in the background and plays about what I'm doing, I do want to do a bit of a shout out, not just to my friends that have been really dealing with me procrastinating on this video, but specifically for my one Patreon subscriber so far. His name's Clem, or that's what he goes by, and he's been really supportive with my projects. He's kind of the number one guy I give all my feedback to, all the ideas I want to do, and he does kind of challenge me and push me to try the ideas that I want to do, and kind of, helps me filter out some ideas that maybe aren't for the best. So now he and I did make a deal that if I can get another video out within about a couple weeks, we'll do kind of another project, and I hope not only to get that done, but also to showcase maybe some of his models that have been an inspiration for me in another video down the line. So stay tuned for that. Thanks again, Clem, for supporting me, and not just on Patreon, but with my hobby overall. So thanks, man. Now, as you can see, what I go ahead and do is I do the gunmetal gray on the end piece connections here and the weapon bronze to really set it apart. After I do that, I use the weapon bronze to kind of like edge out the metal coloration I did with the rough iron, and then I detail a little bit more with that gunmetal gray on certain connection pieces, just to kind of help it stick out a bit, not make everything look like it's like two colors. Now I go ahead and use, again, a bit more of that weapon bronze to kind of showcase the important parts of that chassis. I do that so that way it kind of draws the eye there, and it's like, hey, this is a very, I guess, iconic piece of my armor, right? Like when you look at it, it's bam. That's something to focus in on. Now, I didn't show as many of the mistakes as I wanted to. If I did this video, even with the like 3 times speed, would take forever. I mean, we'd be looking at like an hour-long video or more with how many mistakes and redos I do. And here I'm just gonna do a little bit of a comparison between before and after I added that weapon bronze and gunmetal gray to my model. Now, what I go ahead and do with my model, or models, but mostly just model singular, is I put on gunmetal gray on the hose attachments now. And I wouldn't say it's edge highlighting, I wouldn't say it's dry brushing, because it is before I wash it. But again, I want to make this model look gritty at the end of it, so everything's getting a nice Nuln oil wash afterwards. Nothing's going to be popping out too much, I hope. Now, one issue I kind of ran into is the Army Painter paints. If you've had them for as long as I did, like 6-7 months without messing with them, they do get clogged. So right here with my leather brown, I'm going to be using for the satchels and the belts and all that stuff that has basically a buckle attached to it. I had to, punch it out with like one of my drill pieces, and then it was finally good to go. And like I said, I'm going to be working on the belt and the pouches, and I recommend, I guess, upgrading to a finer detailed brush if you care about getting this kind of stuff. Or I guess, I could have just slapped black on it, but I really want to go pretty deep on this. So after I put the leather brown on the pouch and the belts, I go ahead and color in the buckle with gunmetal gray, and then at the very center with the button itself, I do weapon bronze. It is a bit above and beyond, even for me, I would think, on some of these details, but I know that it'll pay off over time, and I'll really kind of enjoy the detail level of my models when I've got like 10 or 20 of these guys on the field, You definitely want to be careful of oversaturation when it comes to these tiny parts. So less is definitely more, but if you ever run into an issue, you can always use capillary action, and again, just oversaturate it with water, and then, dry off your brush on some paper towels and suck it back up. Now, when I do the purity seal, I do a couple more layers of Ushabti bone than I did on the cloak itself, because I really know it's going to be a focal point for people's eyes. So either you want to do more layers, or you want to make it thicker. If you make it too watery, it really disperses on itself. I don't really change the seal too much from that Screamer Pink, because I think it looks fine as a center portion. Though I do color the edge of the wax with a deep red from Army Painter. After that, I go ahead and scribble on some matte black with a really fine detail brush. I think I used the Psycho brush from Army Painter. And then after that, I use the Seraphim Sepia to give it a wash. I do redo it off screen, so you'll see it at the end product. Now after that, I go ahead and put on the Nuln oil wash on the armor plates and all the armor details. If it gets on some of the cloaks, not a big deal, because we're going to throw another wash on top of that. But I definitely do be careful, and I do put a good amount of the wash in the cracks, and then soak it up a bit, just so it doesn't oversaturate. After that, I put on 2 light coats of the Drucci Violet on the cloak itself. The reason why is because I definitely don't want any cooling on this. I don't want it to look like you can see droplets on this, unlike when I did my Space Marines on my first video. So this one I'm a little bit more careful with. You know, as you can see, the first layer is going on. It's already kind of changing the entire color of that cloak. And now that I'm putting on the second layer, you're gonna see that it just brings it to this rich, deep, royal purple. And I think it looks absolutely fantastic. I'm really happy I went with this color choice, and I'm excited to see all of my Admech stuff get turned into this color. And here's what it looks like after all the washes of the Nuln oil and the Drucci Violet. And I mean, that's looking nice and grimdark right there. After that's done, I go ahead and go back over the model with the Screamer Pink, and on very select portions, I do Warpfiend Gray, but not a lot of it, so I don't end up showing it. It's just a difficult paint to work with. Now, for the Adeptus Mechanicus, you'll see that the sigils of where the white and the black are in different locations on the actual box of the Start Collecting. So I pulled up the Codex and decided to go ahead and just follow the main symbol on the Skitarii on the front. So white cog left, white skull on the right, and obviously inverse with black. Now, when I did this, I actually used an off-white. It's called Spaceship Exterior from Army Painter. That way you're not getting this pure bright white on this thing. I know I'm not going to put a wash on it, so I want to have something that's a little more, I guess, realistic in the tone of what I'm doing with this model. Nothing's worse than having like a paint that just contrasts the whole thing way too much. I don't go nuts with the emblem here. I don't edge highlight it or anything like that, but it's good enough for me, and I hope it's good enough for you guys. Now, for the wiring, I go ahead and use Jungle Green and a little bit of Daemonic Yellow to make it really pop. And then on the other side for the wiring, which you'll see when I rotate this, I use Daemonic Yellow and kind of do a stripe pattern with it, though it's not nearly as good as Game Workshop stuff that they display on their website. But again, it's another one of those situations that was good enough for me. Now, for the rest of the Skitarii, like doing the Skitarii Vanguard head, and the Skitarii Ranger head and their weapons, it pretty much follows the same exact principles as before, just on a smaller scale. Though you might be thinking, hey, Tyrant, that's gotta be way harder. It really isn't, because you're putting on such little paint that it makes your life a lot easier to deal with it. All the smaller cracks are just washed out. I gotta say, it was a lot less stressful for some reason, but probably because I had a lot of practice with the main body. So if you're ever, feeling kind of daunted about the tiniest parts, like again, the weapons and the heads, I wouldn't be. I think you'll do just fine, just like me. Now, for my illuminating portions and my emissives, I want to go ahead and use the Army Painter Desert Yellow, but another alternative to that I would think is Citadel Averland Sunset. They're both extremely close in coloration. And I originally just did the lenses in that, but I know I want to make them emissive, so I kind of do it by hand here in a bit. But hopefully maybe after I do this video, I'll try and be a little more experimental with that airbrush and kind of spray it to give that real glow over on the rest of the body. But I kind of wimped out on it and was just kind of happy with what I had here. Now, if you end up getting some flaky parts on it, you can use some finer tools and some tweezers to pull it out. It's again just a game of patience, so don't try and do anything rash. Just take your time. If you get frustrated, just put it down like I did, because it's not worth ruining the whole model. Now, to make the lenses really pop and to kind of give them that 3D glass effect, I essentially just start about the left half of the lenses and mix in some whites with that desert yellow paint and slowly progressively make it lighter and lighter and just kind of cover those edges. And then once I stop doing that, I get some of that off-white, not just the pure white I had, and put it in those goggles, because again, I don't want it being too bright. And at the end of it, I go ahead and clean it up with some more of those metals that I previously mentioned, the rough iron, weapon bronze, and gunmetal gray, so that way the lenses aren't caked over in that yellow until I decide to do that airbrush technique, maybe in the next video. Now for the weapon itself, I go ahead and go back to using the Army Painter Leather Brown, because I want to give these weapons that wood effect on there. I don't do anything crazy like doing wood grain or anything. The most I do, or the best I do, is just put on a bunch of layers of that brown. And then for the metal, I go ahead and use that rough iron, and then I edge highlight, I guess, with that weapon bronze. It does take a lot of time, it does take a lot of patience. Definitely just use the side of your brush if you decide you want to do the same things I did. Because as you can see, as I'm rotating it through my fingers over and over again, through various stages in the process, I kind of show the amount of work I put into it. And after a while, it really does look like an ornate weapon that people in the Mechanicus would be proud of, I would hope. Now, I had an issue with the arms holding together because they're magnetized with the weapon, the offhand anyways, so I go ahead and magnetize the end of the offhand, and I clip a small piece of metal very carefully that would fit into the hand that's attached to the weapon, and I drill into it just a little bit and place it on there with some super glue, and at that point it just sticks on the model as if it was glued together, so I'm really happy about that. Now, regarding the cogs on the outfits and the head, I tried to do it by hand for the Skitarii Ranger head. It turned out fine, but I had to redo the cloak because I wasn't happy with it. So instead, I tried to stencil it out with some blue painter's tape. And, you know, the paint I'm using here is the Ushabti bone from Citadel. And I put on like 5 layers on it, maybe a bit too thick, honestly. And when I peeled back the tape, I wasn't quite happy at the angles I taped it at. So, you already guessed it, when it's done, I end up stripping it anyways, and just kind of have a whole nightmare show to plug through. But thankfully, with all the experience I've kind of built up to this point, all the times I've redone it, it's kind of a snap. So, you know, you live and learn. You have to fail before you succeed. So after I go ahead and strip it, I kind of get the angle I want with that painter's tape. And at that point, it's just painting the cogs on. I do like little boxes, essentially, a little bit larger than the stuff that's on the art, because I really want people to notice it right away, but not big enough where it's kind of distracting. Now, all I do during the rest of this is just repeat these processes on the helmets and weapons and everything else, so I really have nothing else left to say. I did take some still shots here that you guys can enjoy for my little outro, which is basically me just saying, you know, stay tuned for the next video that's coming out in a couple weeks here. And if you guys like what you've seen, like, subscribe, comment, you know, just hit me up on my chat. And you can always sign up on Patreon to get into our little 1000 Gears Discord. Thank you so much for watching, guys, and we'll see you around.